Back again, and welcome back to the coding workshop. And on this special, well, mini special occasion where we've just hit 200 subs, I want to thank everyone who's been watching the video so far, who's been contributing, who's been commenting, who's been liking, sharing the video and all that. I want to thank you guys for taking part in this little channel. It's a small channel. We've just hit 200 subs, and I'm going to be doing a quick video where I'm going to be building or implementing a dependency injection. I know it's something that you guys has been asking for a little while, but for this special day we're going to be implementing that. We're going to be building it out from scratch. It's only going to be a very small component. I'm going to build it. I'm going to also demonstrate how I'm using it within my framework, so you guys can get a little bit more knowledge of how you can then go about using it in your own projects. So without further ado, we're going to jump straight into it. So to start us off, you can see that I've already got my editor open up. I've also got a plugin which I should be doing a review of at some point, but this is called Browser Preview. I think that's what it's called, and it just allows me to have a split editor where I can display a web page and I can also display my editor. So that's what I've got set up on my screen right now. I've got on the right, I've got PHP Fig website up, because the container we're going, or the dependency injection we're going to be implementing, we're going to be using the PSR-11 container interface. So we're sort of like using the standards or the go-to factor these days when it comes to implementing stuff that's going to be compatible with a lot of different framework across the web. So we're going to be implementing our container or dependency injection using PSR-11 container interface. And you can see I'm on the website, and you guys can go on there and check it out, have a little read. There's a lot of different interfaces that we can implement that's going to make our project compatible with a lot of different frameworks out there. So this is what we're going to be doing. Just go on there, have a little read, see what it's all about. But what I need on here is the interface and the exception that it gives us, so we can then build our component based on these particular interfaces. So we see we've got the first one, which is a container interface, which contains two methods, the get method and an as method, which is going to check that we've got a dependency that we're trying to call before we call it. And it's a boolean, it returns a boolean, true or false, and as I said, it's going to check if we've got a dependency. So that's the container interface. The next one is a container exception interface and a not found exception interface. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create these within my editor on the left. I'm just going to create a new directory in the main root directory and build it from there. I've already got this component that I built already. It's one that I've been using from day one, and it's already there. But as I said, I'm going to be building it from scratch and try and explain along the line what I'm actually doing. So I'm going to create the directory that I'm going to place all these files in. I'm going to come and copy and paste these containers, or these classes I should say, and paste them into files, and then I'm going to build a container which is going to implement that interface, and I'm going to show you how I've done it. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but this is my implementation, and I'm not saying it's the best. It's what I've been using, it's what's been working for me. And again, if you want to look at different implementation, I beg you to go on GitHub or search the web. You'll find a lot of different implementation, but mine is a very simple implementation that uses PHP reflection class, and that is how I'm going to implement dependency injection with auto wiring, which is going to automatically instantiate or other dependency that we pass into the constructor via type inted class. So that's what I'm going to be implementing, and I'm going to do that so you guys can see it and you can follow along, and at the end you can use it how you see fit. So I'm going to create a new directory in, let's create that within our app folder. Let's call it container. And within that, I'm going to create these 3 files that we've got on the PSR website. I'm going to create them into my new container directory. So the first is a container interface. PHP. The second, let's close that. The second is going to be not found exception interface. And the other one is container exception interface. .php. So I'm just going to copy and paste what we've got right here, and then I'm going to fix up the namespace so it matches our own project. So that's the container exception interface. Copy that. Well, that doesn't work. That's one more thing that I've noticed with this browser preview plugin. Even though it's quite handy, it doesn't contain. It's not like a regular browser where you can do certain things, because you can see I can't even copy. I can't even right click and copy. So I'm gonna have to just write it out manually. All right. So that's gonna be PHP. Declare strict type. This is so normal now. I'm always writing strict type at the very top. And it's going to be namespace. We're in app directory, and it's going to be container, just like that. So I'm going to say our interface, I should say interface, and it's going to be container exception interface, just like so. So I'm going to come to the next one, which is not found exception interface, and I'm going to do exactly what they've got on the website right here. So I'm going to say, let's just copy and paste this one, copy it, paste it. I'm going to say not found exception interface, and that is simply extending that container interface, container exception interface. So we're going to import that, and it's going to be app container, yep, that one, and save it. So that's fine. Close. So let's now implement those two methods within that container interface, which is the get method and an as method. So let's paste that code in again. Let's change that to a class. It's going to be not class. It's going to be an interface, I should say. It's going to be a container interface, and it contains two methods. I'm not going to put the metadata on it right now, just so I can speed the video up. I mean, you guys can go there and, well, I'm going to be putting this in at a later date so you can get the updated code on GitHub, but the implementation is going to be exactly how we've implemented it in this particular video. So just say public function is get, and its ID. And the second method is as. So it's public function. What have I spelled wrong? Function as, just like so, and it requires, well, it takes one parameter as well, which is also the ID. So we're going to create our container file. It's going to be container.php. Let's do all the opening tags. It's going to be class container. We're going to be implementing that container interface. So let's just fix this up, just like so. And you can see it's screaming at us because we've got those two methods which we've not yet implemented. So I'm going to say public function get. It's got one parameter. Create the body. And the next method is as. So public function as. It's got one parameter. Just like so. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be implementing this get method, and the as method is really as simple as returning true or false if we've got a value, right? So I'm going to be breaking down this code into multiple methods just to make it a little bit more easy to sort of understand and read, right? So the first method I'm going to implement is the get method. So the first thing I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to create a property that is going to hold an instance of whatever we pass into this particular method, whatever argument we've passed into this get method. We're going to create an array, a property array, which is going to hold all of those ID. So I'm going to say private array, I'm going to call it instance, and it's going to equal to an empty array, just like so. Then I'm going to come into my get method. I'm going to say this, well, I'm going to create a variable called concrete. It's going to equal this instance, which is that property that we just created, and I'm going to store that ID within that instance array, right? I'm going to say return this resolve, which is a private method that we're going to implement within this particular class, which is going to resolve that instance, right? So I'm going to say concrete, just like so. Let me just retype that, concrete, just like so. So it's shouting at us up because we've not yet created that method yet. So we can come down at the bottom down and say private function resolve, just like so. So let's take care of this as method. As I'm saying, it's a simple method which is going to return a Boolean value based on the actual parameter. So we'll just say return is it this instance ID. That's it. So that's going to return bool. Well, it's going to return true if we've got a value, and it's going to return false if not. And that's as simple as that. Well, that's as simple as I've implemented that particular method. So in my resolve method, what I want to resolve all the instances that's been passed to this get method. So I'm going to say concrete, because that's the parameter that we're accepting through this resolve method, which we've declared within the get method, right? So we're trying to resolve every instance of this ID that's been passed in, or a name. The ID could be anything. It could be a namespace of the class that you're trying to load, or it could just be a name, a simple name. Does not matter at this particular stage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say reflection, and that's going to equal new. It's called reflection class, and what we want a reflection of, we want a reflection of that concrete variable. So it's going to be concrete, if I can spell that right, just like so. It's new reflection class. Let's import that code in, and it's imported at the very top, so it's cool. So I'm going to say if exclamation mark reflection, if I can type this properly, is not instantiable then we're going to throw an exception. So we're saying if the reflection class, if we can't instantiate the reflection class, I want to throw an exception. So I'm going to say throw new dependency is not instantiable exception. And obviously we've not created this class yet, so we're going to actually go ahead and create it. And I'm going to copy and paste this long text so I don't have to retype it. I'm going to create a new file within this exception directory, paste that, say PHP. So that's the name of our file. Dependency is not instantiable exception. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to just copy some boilerplate code so I don't have to rewrite it. Just copy that and paste it in. Let's get rid of all of that, and let's reference our new directory, which is our exception directory, because that's where our exception class is going to be stored. So let's call that. Let's change this name to dependency not instantiable exception. Where's it gone? That one. And we're going to get rid of this implementation, and we're going to extend exception, which is a PHP exception. Let's just import that class in, just like so. I just need the base PHP exception, just like so. So I'm going to leave it as it is. I'm going to pass a simple message within this particular parentheses. I'm just say class concrete is not instantiable, just like so. So what I'm doing right here, I've passed in, you see I've used double quotes, and that allows me to pass in the PHP variable directly. So the next thing I want to tackle is the constructor of our concrete class. I want to check if a constructor, if the class has got a constructor, we're going to instantiate it, or if we've got a constructor with parameters, we can then use a separate method to resolve those parameters, and that's what we're going to be referring to as auto wiring. So put a semicolon here, and I'm going to say create a new variable called constructor. That's going to equal to reflection, and I'm going to get a constructor method from that reflection class, just like so. Then I'm going to say if is null constructor, then I want to return reflection new instance. So what I'm doing right here is I'm returning a new instance of that concrete class constructor if there's no parameters to resolve, right? It's just a standard class with no type inted classes, so there's nothing to resolve, so I'm just going to return a new instance of that particular class, just like that. So the next bit I want to tackle is if we've got parameters, I want to get those parameters, and I'm going to boot it off to a separate method so I can resolve it, just to break the class down a little bit, or break the method down a little bit. So I'm going to say parameters, and that's going to equal constructor, and I want to get the parameters, and these are all method from that reflection class, right? Again, you could go on PHP website, you could look up the reflection class and see the manual and see all the method that you can call on it, all the method that you can call or you can use. I'm going to say dependency, which is the next variable I'm going to create. Dependencies, spell that properly, and that's going to equal this. And I'm going to say get dependencies, which is going to be a method that we've not yet created, which is going to resolve our dependencies for us. And I'm going to pass in that parameter variable that we've created, and I'm also going to pass in a copy of that reflection argument, that reflection variable. So we've got access to that reflection object within our get dependency method that we're going to create. Semicolon right there. And what we want to do is return reflection and return new instance args. I'm going to pass in those dependencies, just like so. So what we're saying is, let's fix this up, just like so. That should be that get dependencies. So we've not yet let's just create this method, and I can come back and explain to you what's going on. So it's going to be a private method private function, get dependencies. Let's copy the name right here. Paste it. Takes two arguments, which is a parameter and that reflection class. Just like so. Still getting some issues. What we got right here? Parameters. Well, that's not spelled properly. Let's copy that. Paste it. Save. And dependencies. Dependencies. Copy that. Save right there. New instance with args. Yeah, so the reason why I'm getting this error, because obviously we've not returned anything. So we're expecting an array, because this particular method is expecting an array. And obviously we've created a method, but we're not returning anything. So if I do something like return an empty array, that error should go just like that. But obviously we're not going to do that because we haven't implemented that method yet. So what I'm doing right here is I've created a variable called parameters, and I'm getting the parameters from the constructor if there's any available. I've created a new variable called dependencies, which is going to hold or contain the results of that external, well, of that private method get dependencies that we've created down here, because it's going to return an array of dependencies that we're going to resolve. This is what we call auto wiring. So we could type int a class within the constructor, and this method will basically take those parameters and instantiate them for us. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to say private function get dependencies. I've passed in the parameters. I'm going to create a new variable called dependencies. Again, that's going to equal to an empty array. Then I'm going to say for each parameters as parameter. So I'm looping through all those parameters that's been provided by the constructor. I'm going to say dependency, which is a next variable I'm going to create, dependency equal parameter get class. There's some confusion around this actual get class method, because I think it's been deprecated, because I can't seem to find any reference of it, but it still seems to work. For the time being, I'm going to continue using it, but I think I need to do a little bit more research into an alternative that I can actually use to do what I'm doing right here. But for the time being, I'm going to leave it as it is. So at this point, what I want to do is I want to actually check if any default value is being passed to the constructor, because our reflection class cannot resolve unresolvable variables. So we want to actually throw an exception if that is the case. So we're going to check if there's any default value set, get them default value, or we're going to just throw an exception because it's unresolvable. So I'm going to say if is null dependency. I'm going to say if parameter is default, I think it's called is default value available. I think that's what it's called. If any default value is available, we're going to store those default value in this dependency variable that we created earlier. So dependencies equal param, and it's going to be get default value. Else we're going to throw an exception if the value is unresolvable. Like if we're trying to pass in variables, we cannot resolve variables because they don't really mean anything in this context. Type into classes, however, is resolvable. Variables aren't. So we're going to throw an exception if that is the case. So we're going to throw new, and we're going to call it dependency as no default value exception, which is a class that we have not created yet. So I'm going to say dependency as no default value exception. I'm going to copy this text. I'm going to create the file in our exception directory, create a new file, paste it, .php. Let me just copy and paste what we've got in here and paste it in this new class. Get the name again, paste it there. So we are extending the exception class, but we're also going to be implementing that not found exception interface that we got from the PSR website. Let's bring that in, import that in, and this one, save, and let's do the same for our first dependency that we create. We're going to implement not found exception interface. Let's import the class again. This one, class already there. Yep. So that's that. So we're going to throw this exception, put the semicolon there, and we're going to pass a message in. We're going to say, sorry, cannot resolve class dependency, and we're going to pass the name of the parameter that we were that passed in that's unresolvable. So I'm going to concatenate the parameter name, and I'm going to get that through that parameter variable from our for each loop. Call it name, just like so. So if the dependency is null, then we're going to say else. We're going to say dependencies, which is that variable that we created, and we're going to say equal to get, which is the first method. And what are we getting? We're getting the name, the dependency name, or the parameter name that we set, a type inted parameter name that we can resolve. We're going to get that name, and we're going to pass it to that get method, just like so. So now each time we use that get method, pass in a class that we want to resolve, is going to be get stored within that instance variable, which we've got up here within this get method. Where is it? That get method, right? Pass that ID in, which can be a qualified namespace for the class that we're trying to pass to our container, so we can dependency inject that within to our project, right? So we're passing those in to that get method, which is going to store all of those as an array within this variable, which we're then going to be passing back to this new instance arg, and it's going to resolve all of those type inted class for us. Again, it could be as much as you want or as little as you want. It's going to resolve them for us. However, it won't resolve any variable. If we're trying to pass in the variables within our constructor, it's going to throw an exception saying, sorry, cannot resolve that dependency. Right? I hope that makes sense. It's a very simple implementation. I mean, you could go nuts on it if you wanted to, but this does the job for me. It's what I've been using from day one, and it works perfectly fine within my actual project. So I'm going to actually demonstrate this for you by creating some test classes. I'm going to var dump the results so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So at this point, our class looks off ready. We're going to go ahead and we're going to create some test files, and we're going to see what we're going to get back and make adjustments accordingly. But I'm going to do this all within the app directory. So I'm going to create a new directory called test class, just something generic, called a test class. And within that directory, I'm going to create two files, two class files. So the first is going to be, again, just testing. It doesn't matter what we call them, but I'm going to call this user model.php. And I'm going to come out here, I'm going to fill this out a bit. I'm going to give it a namespace, and it's going to be app test case, because test class, because that's the name of the directory that we're in. Say class user model, and I'm going to create a couple of setter and get a method, right? So the first one I'm going to create is a public function. I'm going to call it set, and it's going to take one parameter. I'm not going to do any sort of like casting variables to data type. This is just a simple test class which I'm going to create so we can demonstrate our dependency injection. So I'm just going to call this name. I'm going to create a private property called name. I'm going to say this name equal name. I'm just going to return that within a get method. So public function get return name, just like so, or return this name. So this is our base class. I'm going to create a second class which is going to accept this class as a dependency injection within the constructor. So I'm going to say user.php, and let's copy this boilerplate code so we don't have to rewrite it again. Let's copy that, paste it in, and let's clear this out. Call this user. So what we want in here, we want a constructor. And say public function construct, and I want to type in that user model class within this constructor. So user model, and I'm going to give it a variable called user. Create another private variable, private property I should say, called user, and I'm going to cast it to this argument. So user equal user. So now, because this is a private method, I want to return it as a public private property. I want to return it as a public method so we can access it access it outside of this class. So just say public function, and it's going to be, I'm going to call it user model, and I'm going to return that user model object. I'm going to be this user, just like so. So I've typed into that user model class to the constructor, which I'm going to then instantiate our user class, and that should automatically instantiate this user model and allow us to access those methods within this particular class. That's what we're going to try and do. So I'm going to go to my index file, which is my root or my main application file. I'm going to do all of this from this file, but I'm going to bring up that browser preview again so we can see together what we're getting. So I'm going to go on localhost, so you can see the front page of the website. I'm going to var dump, so we're going to block that out. We're going to instantiate our class and then see what we're getting back. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that container class in, which is a use app container. That's going to be a container, just like so. So I'm going to instantiate that class. I'm going to say container equal new container. Going to var dump that. I'm going to kill all the scripts below so we're not executing anything else. Say container, and I'm going to reload the page, and you can see we've got that container object instantiated. So what we want to try and do now is bring that user class in, which has got that user model, type into the constructor and see what happens. So we're going to create a new variable. Let's call it user. I'm going to say new, to say container actually. I'm going to call that get method, and I'm going to pass in a qualified namespace for that user class. So say user : class, just like so. Put a semicolon at the end. I'm going to import that class into our file so we get access to it, which is what we just see right here, which is app test class user, right? Which is effectively what we're doing right here. User : class is going to return the same thing as what you see right here, a qualified namespace. So our reflection class is going to see that, and it can instantiate it for us. So we're saying user equal container get user class, and from that user class, what we want to access is that user model, and we want to access those methods that we've set in that user model class. So I'm going to say user model, and we want to set a name. Let's put my name. Let's be Ricardo. semicolon. I'm going to say echo user model. I want to get that value that we set above. Obviously, we don't need these var dumps anymore, so let's just comment that out, leave a die script in, so we're still killing everything below. Let's see what we're getting back. So now we're getting an error, and if you see the error, it says undefined key app test class user, and right away we know that we're missing something from our actual container class, and this is something that I have not done on purpose because I want you to see exactly what we're missing and what we're going to do to rectify it. So you can see that we instantiate our new container and we immediately call in that get method, and we're getting something. Obviously the class does not know what we're getting. We're getting something that does not exist. That's effectively what it's saying. So we need to find a way to actually set something before we get it. So we're going to go back to our container class and we're going to rectify this. And it's a simple fix, and I'm going to say I'm going to create another method, and I'm going to automatically set that argument or set that ID before we call the get method. So we're automatically setting it before we're getting it, if that makes sense. So I'm going to say public function set, which is going to take two arguments. It's going to be ID for the first, and the second is going to be that concrete class. All right. So, and that's going to equal to null. Actually, I'm going to equal that to null. So equal null. So I'm going to say if concrete is equal to null, then I'm going to say concrete equal ID, just like so. Then below here, I'm going to say this instance, which is a variable that we've created earlier, we're going to pass the ID into that instance, and we're going to equal it to the concrete class. Just like so. Let's just spell this properly so we're not getting an error. Just like so. So down into our get method, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be setting that actual concrete class before we get it. So we're going to say, we're going to use our as method. So we're going to say if exclamation mark this as ID, then we're going to set that actual concrete class. So we're saying if the ID does not exist, then set it before we actually try and get it. And say this set, if I can type, oh my days, ID. So if it does not exist, using this as method, then we're going to set it. So when we're trying to get that actual dependency, it's going to return it for us. So let's save that page. Let's go back to our index page, and this should not change. This will stay exactly as it is. But if we now reload, you can see now we're getting that value. So now not only have we just instantiated our user class, but we didn't actually have to instantiate the user model because we've typed into the user class constructor. It automatically get resolved for us. So we can then use this user model method that we've created, which is going to return that user model object. So we can then use this user model method to access those methods and set a name, and then we can get that name. And that's pretty much what dependency injection is. And this is what you call basic dependency injection, by allowing us to do stuff like this, so we don't have to instantiate a lot of different classes to get what we want. We can simply pass those classes to our constructor, and it will automatically resolve those for us. So that's a basic example of what dependency injection is. It's, oh, I'm using it within this particular application, and I'm going to actually demonstrate to you, oh, I'm using it. But before I go, let's actually change this. Set it to Miller And you can see we can reload. It's going to give us whatever we set. We're going to get it back in that get method. So let's have a look at these two classes again before we sign this off. So user model is the class that we want to access from our user class. So we've pretty much typed into that user model class. We've given a variable called user. We created a private property within the user class called user, and we've cast that user property to that user variable. I was simply returning that object within this user model method. So we can then access it just like what we're doing right here. We're accessing that user model from our user class and calling that set method, and then setting the value and then getting that value back and echoing it out on our screen. What you can see right here. Obviously there's a lot more you can do with this. This is just a basic example, and you can use this example to actually implement it in your own project and actually start using dependency injection as you see. But take note that when you're designing your classes, you have to design them in mind. If, for example, if you want your class to be dependency injected into another constructor, you have to design it properly so you can do that. Remember what I was saying, you cannot resolve variables. Variables is unresolvable. It's going to throw an error if you're trying to resolve a class with a constructor full of variables. We only resolve type inted classes, right? It does not resolve variables. So if you're going to design your class because you want to use it as dependency injection, be aware that you have to design a class with that in mind. Right, so I'm going to quickly demonstrate to you how I've set this up into my project and how I'm using it. Again, the container component is the same as what we've just written, and obviously it's going to be on GitHub, so if you want to go and get that and have a look at it, you can do. Be free to do so. So let's close all these pages down for a bit. And while I close this down as well, finish with that. And let me show you where my class, or how I'm using it. So if we take you to the vendor folder, let's find our Magma core directory. You can see we've got our container component right here, but I've added a factory class in, and that is simply instantiating our container object. And the reason why I've created a factory is so we're implementing that container interface, which is a PSR-11 standard, and effectively we could pass in another implementation of that container object. So long as we're implementing that interface, we can pass in a next implementation and it should effectively work the same, right? So that's the reason for the factory, is creating a new container object of whatever kind. So we're saying if the container is not null, we're going to use that default one that we've created, right? Or use the one that we're trying to implement, the new one that we're trying to bring in. Else we're going to use that default container object that is part of the container component. But that's what the factory class does. It allows us to actually bring in another implementation so long as we're implementing the container interface, which is the PSR-11 container interface. So from that, I'll take it to my base folder. I got my base bootloader class right here, and take it to what method? Got a method here that I've implemented. Let's try and find that method. di-get. Another naming, I'm going to probably change the naming at some point so it's a little bit more reflective. But di-get or dependency get is where I've instantiated that container factory. I've called that create method, and I'm then calling that get method and passing in those dependencies, which is the argument for this di-get method. Dependencies, and I'm passing it to the get method. Remember what I just said? We are automatically setting those dependencies before we get them, which is what we've just demonstrated in our container component. So from there, I can take you to a trait class, and it's the controller traits. And this is how I'm using it within my controller classes. I've got the DI container, which takes an array, a key value pair of dependencies, which gets assigned a key. I'm going to show you that in a minute. And we're simply looping through those, and we're filtering out data columns and column, because we don't want those to be resolved. We want to actually pass it in so we can use the key as a property to call that object, but we don't want to instantiate it. So that's what we're doing right here. We're sort of like looking for any key that's got, well, any key that matches these string data columns and column. And if we've got a key that matches those, we're going to simply remove it from the array and not instantiate it. So once we loop through all those dependencies, we then call that base application class and that di get method and pass that class in. And that's exactly how I'm using it, because we now got an array of dependency which we're looping through, and then we're instantiating them one by one. So if I take it to a controller class, let's look at the user controller. So this is where we've defined our DI container, and you can see we've passed in an array of a key value pair array of keys, which represents the actual object that we're trying to get, our actual class that we're trying to get an object of, right? So our repository now represents the user model, so we can then use it just like so, this repository, to get the actual methods of that object that we're trying to fetch. Hope that makes sense. So this is exactly how I'm using it within my framework. I've got the controller trait, which I'm using to define this DI container method, which I'm passing in all the definition that I want to pass to my container, which is going to get instantiated for me. And I've also got a class within my config directory called providers, and these are some providers that is available to all the controller classes. So instead of actually creating these individually in every controller class, I can globally make these accessible to all controller classes, and these are being loaded from the base controller class. So all my controller classes got access to all of these actual object, and this is simple key value pair array done in YAML. So again, I prefer YAML. It's my preference. You guys can actually create a PHP file and return these key value pairs, which you can then pass to your container, which is going to actually auto-wire all of these for you. So this is how I'm using my container object. You can see it started in the base, in the abstract base loader, where I'm creating or getting an instance of that container factory, and from there I'm simply just passing arrays or looping over arrays of dependency and send it to this get method, and it's just going to all get resolved for me. Again, my classes are designed to be like this. I've designed these classes to be loaded via a container, so there's no variables to resolve. The only resolving other classes that is passed to the constructor. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to be putting all the files on GitHub, so you can jump and go and have a look with it, have a look on it, play around with it, just see how it works for you. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. Again, this was a 200 subs video special. I hope you guys enjoy this particular one. I know it's been something that's been requested for a little while, so now I've got around to doing it. Yeah, thanks for all the support, subscriptions, likes and share. Again, please comment down in the comment section if you want to know a bit more, or you can head over to GitHub. You could download the project there and have a little play around with it. So thanks, guys. See you again real soon.